Today, it is Reflection, Psalms of Remembrance out of Psalm 136. So can we all stand in the room? We're going to read the word of the Lord together. We're going to do a little bit differently today. So where it has like regular, like non-bolded, non-italics is me. Where it's bolded and italicized is you all, okay? So really loud and big. The group, it's really easy. It's the same phrase every single time, okay? So his faithful love endures forever is the call and response, all right? So I'll go first. Psalm 136, verse 1. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. Give thanks to the God of gods. Give thanks to the Lord of lords. Give thanks to him who alone does mighty miracles. Give thanks to him who made the heavens so skillfully. Give thanks to him who placed the earth among the waters. Next slide. In the back, next slide, please. Go back. Give thanks to him who made the heavenly lights, the sun to rule the day, and the moon and stars to rule the night. Give thanks to the God of heaven. His faithful love endures forever. This is the word of the Lord today. You may be seated. So we are in week 5 of our 8-week series on the book of Psalms, and we're going through different genres that we see in the book of Psalms. Psalms are poems. They are not meant to be read with a scientific mindset. They are meant to be read, chewed on, meditated, listened to over and over again until it starts to change you. So we know that Psalms are an invitation for us to worship. And so this series is focusing on us. How do we worship again? The very first we learned about praise, if you go to the next slide, praise is what orients us rightly to God as we worship him. Praise is what orients us rightly to God as we worship him. If you go to the next slide, when we feel disoriented, there is space and permission for lament that brings us back to God. And so we talked about praise, worship, all the good things, and lament. There are seasons when we don't feel like worshiping. And all we can bring to God is our discouragement, our tears, and our fears. And God says there is space for that. Actually, you voicing your concerns, worries, tears, and fears is worship to me. Our third week is that gratitude is what reorients us to God when we experience seasons of joy and mourning. It's gratitude that brings us back to God when we feel lost. Last week, we talked about when we worship God, he is our source of confidence and comfort, especially in dark valleys. And so here we are today. Today, we are learning about when we remember who God is and what he has done, it inspires us to worship him. The key is remember. When you and I remember what God has done, when we reflect on what God has done, that is what inspires us to worship. Now, the reverse is true. When you and I do not feel inspired to worship, right? Because don't raise your hands, but I'm sure all of you should. If you've ever felt uninspired to worship, you're dragging your feet to come into church. You're like, why am I here today? I'm here because there's food. Or I'm here because that guy is cute, or whatever, okay? I'm pretty sure it's not because I super want to listen to somebody's message. That's not what it is usually, okay? You are here for a reason, yes, but sometimes we don't feel inspired to worship. You might be thinking, that person over there, they're worshiping so hard about God is so good and all these things. Like, I don't feel that right now. All of us have seasons where we don't feel inspired to worship. And so the reverse is true. When you do not feel inspired to worship, the key is to remember and reflect on what God has done, on who he is. That is what inspires us to worship. Our emotions do not inspire us to worship. Our emotions inspire us to spiral sometimes, okay? Or our emotions inspire us to lots of other things. Emotions are important. Yet, Emotions alone cannot dictate worship. Emotions alone cannot dictate worship. Emotions alone cannot dictate obedience. Emotions alone cannot dictate a relationship with God. Emotions get you so far and they help. But the most important thing is to remember and reflect on who he is and what he has done, and that is what inspires us to worship. So essentially, I gave you guys the conclusion, okay? So hold on to that thought as we go through today. Now, I want you guys to think back. Close your eyes right now. Don't fall asleep on me. Close your eyes, okay? Close your eyes. And I want you to reflect back on all of the most important milestones of your life, okay? Think of your earliest memories, big things. Maybe getting a sibling, a move, parents got divorced, or XYZ, okay? So think of all the big milestones throughout your life, changing schools. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe it was something good, something traumatic. Think about all of the good and hard moments in your life. Okay, open your eyes. Hold on to those thoughts, because we're going to wrap back around to that towards the end. As I was preparing for the message, I was thinking about my own life. And sometimes I wonder, what if? Okay, so I'm a second generation Korean American. My parents were immigrants. So my mom and dad, they're probably watching at some point. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. They have a really fun story. I learned about this in high school. Who's watched like The Notebook? So long ago, super old movie, okay? So I didn't watch all of it, but the premise is like, in the story of The Notebook, the girl, Rachel, what's her name? Whatever, Ryan Gosling, the like actors, okay, I forgot their actual names. But they love each other, but her mom doesn't approve, right? So he writes letters to her and then she hides them. Isn't that part of the storyline? Okay. So my parents, my dad and all of his family was immigrating to the States in the 80s when everyone was moving to the States. And so my dad was one of the last ones to move, okay? And so he met my mom in college. Super cheesy, but they met at this bench at college. And so we went there and took a picture on it. But anyway, the point being, so they met in college and my dad was the first Christian in his family. They're all immigrating. And my mom comes from a very Buddhist family, super Buddhist, and no one is immigrating, okay? And so when my dad was preparing to immigrate and he was like, look, I like you a lot. I love you. If you want to live with me and be with me, two things. We're going to be Christians. We're going to tithe 10% of our income to the church, and you got to move to America. So what do you think? That was his proposal, basically. And she was like, yes. I was like, Mom was crazy. So my grandma, she was Buddhist at that time, and so she went to the temple or whatever and like got their fortune or something like that. And the fortune teller lady was like, you cannot keep them together. They're not good for each other. So my dad immigrates to the States because his paperwork came through. And so he writes her a letter every single week. But my grandma bicycles down to the mail post and picks up the letter and hides it so that my mom won't find it. Okay, this goes on for a year. And so my dad is writing every single week. And this is before the internet. This is before like long distance calls were super expensive. And my mom grew up in a super countryside town, so they didn't really have a phone, okay? They only had letters. And so my grandma was picking up the letters all the time. So a year goes by and she goes back to do the same fortune teller lady. And she was like, okay, I mean, like, what should I do? He's still writing letters. So then she gives another fortune and she's like, oceans cannot keep love apart. You must put them back together. And so my grandma was like, what in the world is going to put them apart? So then a year later, my grandma shows her all the letters that she's kept. And the last letter was from my other grandma, so my dad's mom. And she wrote to my mom being like, Akashi, I don't know who you are, but my son will not give up on you, but you have not responded. So if you don't respond back to this letter, we're going to marry him off to someone else. So my mom, real quick, wrote a letter. Long story short, they got married, moved here, they had me, okay? And sometimes I wonder, what if my dad was not that tenacious? If you know my dad, for better or worse, he is very focused on one thing. If it's the wrong thing, it's bad. But if it's the right thing, 쭉 가. Like he's the type where he will just keep going. He will not give up. And I wonder, what if my dad had given up a year in? I would not be here. A, I would not exist, but B, I probably wouldn't have been born here. I would have been born in Korea. I wouldn't have been a Christian. Like there's so many things that one thing had changed and my whole life would have been different. Things that I had zero control over. I think back and I think, God, even before I existed, you were at work in my life so that I could live the life I live today. So many things. Sometimes I wonder, what if I didn't go to the college I went to? I went to college in California. I got a full ride to my in-state school, and I was like, I don't want to stay here. And so I chose to take out loans and go to expensive private school in California. And looking back, I'm like, that was kind of dumb. Like, I shouldn't have done that because, like, you know, that's like extra money. But if I hadn't moved to California, I would have never met Pastor. I would not be a pastor's wife, which I will say is a blessing. And I would not be here today. In 2018, we took a trip to Korea right after Moksanim finished his master's degree. And we had no job. And we're like, we believe in faith that God is going to give us something on this trip. We were cray-cray. And so we went to Korea. We went to this conference. There was like 90 other pastors. We're the only, or the youngest ones. I only speak English. Everyone's, you know, the old Korean pastors, they're all like that, okay? We get placed into this random small group with this one pastor who was Fellowship's original pastor. And he hears me speaking English to my husband. And he's like, do you want to apply for a job? We're like, what? No. And then we called this church and they're like, oh, we're already talking to somebody else. Like, I'm sorry. We're like, it's fine. We're like, okay, sure. We get a call back 2 weeks before Christmas Eve. Our candidate fell through. Do you want to fly out for Christmas Eve to speak? And we're like, okay. And here we are. 6 years later, here we are. So there are so many things that I look back in my life and I'm like, wow, one thing God directed that I had zero control over, and that is why I live the life I live today. Think about your life. There are so many little things that you and I have no control over, even the hard things, even the things that you're like, man, I wish that hadn't happened in my life. Yeah, I wish that too. And yet, even in the hard things, how has God led you to this very moment? When you remember and reflect on what God has done in your life, there is so much to be thankful for and there's so much to worship him about. Does that make sense? We don't worship him because we feel like it. Emotions will not get you very far. They are a good launching point, but they will not sustain you. What sustains you deeply in a life with God is remembering and reflecting on what he has done and who he is. And so first of all, here we go. The first thing we have to remember, can we go to Psalm 136, verse 1? Psalm 136, verse 1. If you can go actually to the slide further back. So Psalm 136, verse 1, 2, and 3. It says, give thanks to the Lord for he is good. His faithful love endures forever. We give thanks to God first of all because of who he is. Because of who he is. Who God is has nothing to do with us. If you and I do something wrong, that does not change his love. My son is 7 years old right now. Is he here? No. Okay, great. 7 years old. He's at the age where he is getting smarter. And so sometimes he'll get in trouble because he does dumb things. And I'm like, yo, buddy, that was not the right thing to do. And he's so firstborn that he'll be like, okay, I'm sorry. And then he's like, do you still love me? You know, like that happens quite a bit, you know. And it's really cute still because I know one day he won't ask that question. But I told him, no matter what you do, my love for you will never change. Because I love you, I discipline you. Because I love you, I embrace all of you, even your cray-cray parts, right? Like I embrace all of you, but I still love you. It is even more so with God. I am not a perfect mom. God is a perfect father. And he says, because of who I am, I love you. Because I am good. Goodness is what primarily describes God. He is good. His number one attribute is he is good. He is good. Think of the most good person you know. Elevate that by infinity. That's how God is. God's goodness never ends. Because we are made in God's image, we know something of goodness because we're made in his image. And yet we are fallen. So our goodness is corrupted. Even when you and I ask, how can God be good? Because there's war, there's famine, there's rape, there's all these things. How can God be good? When we ask that question, how can God be good? What that actually shows us is that we understand there is some kind of standard. There is something outside of us that is good. That is our standard that we all keep. Even when we ask God, even when we question God, even when we doubt God's goodness, we're holding a standard of goodness. The very existence of a standard connects us to the one who is good, to the one who first created all things. God is the God of gods, Lord of lords, his faithful love. Hear this faithful love that we repeated multiple times. In Psalm 136, obviously you can tell this is the pattern of the song. It's a call and response, just like how we did today. So when the speaker would speak it, the congregation would respond. Where it says faithful love, the Hebrew word for that is hesed. Hesed. And hesed, there is no exact translation. You know, in Korean, there are some words you cannot translate. It just does not have the same unk in English, right? Hesed is one of those words. The closest thing is like hesed kind of means like love, mercy, kindness, promise of God wrapped up together, actively moving within us. That's kind of what it means, okay? There's no one word to describe it. That's why in different translations, you'll see this line translated in multiple different ways. His faithful love, his steadfast love, his mercy. You'll see it in multiple ways because there's no one way to really capture that word. But what this means is that this is who God is. No matter what you do, no matter where you go, his hesed love will follow you forever, all the days of your life. All the days of your life. No matter how hard your heart is, how stubborn you and I can be sometimes, no matter how many times we fall on the same sin, his hesed love will follow you forever and ever because that is who he is. That is who he is. God cannot change who he is. He will not change for you. And that's a good thing. He is good. So what does that mean? That means we give thanks to God. We worship God because of who he is. First, because of who he is. So let me ask you, church, do you know his goodness? Have you tasted his goodness? Have you reflected on his goodness recently? The answer will be yes, because that's going to be today, okay? But have you reflected on his goodness in your life, where you are today? When you're feeling overwhelmed, when you're questioning his goodness, you and I must tap more into knowing who God is. The answer is not to find some self-help book that's going to help you through your problems, okay? Those things help, but they're not really eternal. When you feel overwhelmed, when you're struggling, when you feel like something is off inside, you dig deeper into knowing who God is. You say, God, when I'm feeling disoriented, when I'm feeling off, God, help me, push me to know you more. Help me, reveal yourself to me. You said, where I seek you, I will find you. So come, help me seek you, help me find you. He never changes. So push in to knowing who God is. Because when you know who God is, worship naturally flows. Gratitude naturally flows. A life of freedom naturally flows when you know who God is. The next thing is that we give thanks to God because of what he has done. If you look in verse 4 to 9, so there you go, 4, 1 to 6. Go back one slide, there we go, okay? The first thing, the writer of the psalm talks about two major events. The first is creation. If you want to give a cheat sheet, in the Old Testament, the two most significant things that happened is 1, creation, and 2, the Exodus. Those are the two most significant things that happened in the Old Testament. And so he's saying the first thing we thank God for is what he has done. And the most important thing he has done is create the world and create us as the creator. Every act of creation, in other words, if you look, give thanks to him for all the miracles, for all the heavens, for all the earth. Why? Because his faithful love endures forever. Out of love, he created the earth for you and me. So even if you're like, man, Stacey, I got nothing. I have nothing to be thankful for today. Okay, that's fair. Sometimes life really sucks. And then take a deep breath and breathe out. My grandma, also watching, because, the three people who watch these messages are my mom, my dad, and my grandma, okay? So my grandma is 91. She's 92 this year, okay? My grandma, she sends me caca messages. She'll send me YouTube videos. And then she'll ask me why didn't you watch it? Because the one is still there. So you didn't watch it yet. I'm like, I'm busy, grandma, okay? So my grandma is real tight. She's real fun. So I was talking to her yesterday. I'm seeing her in a week or so. And every time Jisung's like, how many, Jingjami's going to live to be 100. I know it. She could make it 8 more years, And I'm like, I'm pretty sure she could. But my grandma, what she tells me every time is you know what? This morning I woke up and I was breathing. I was alive. I was not in heaven yet. She's like, I was kind of sad, but I was kind of happy because I could pray for y'all again. And I was like, thank you for living, grandma. But that's how literally she wakes up and she thinks that. She thinks another day to live. I'm breathing, And I realized, man, if I'm at that age, I'd probably think the same thing. Because there are literally neighbors in your senior apartment who that's their story. My grandma is the neighborhood social lady. So she knocks on everyone's door, make sure they're all alive. That's what she's doing, y'all. She's making sure they're alive. One time they weren't. So she was like, see, people don't make it sometimes through the night. And so I'm alive today. And I realized that is such the way to live, right? You wake up tomorrow morning, you're like, wow, I'm alive today. Okay. That is literally something to worship God for, because he could have been like, you're done, Sam. Done overnight. That would not be okay, right? But we're not going to do that. The point being, God's very breath in your lungs. That is the greatest gift you and I have. For some, living is torture, right? And so that's hard too. Yet at the same time, we have to realize that every day you live and breathe, God has some purpose for you today. God has some calling for you today. God has a reason that you are living and breathing, and it's not just to run the rat race. It's to live a life of purpose in Christ. The second thing we see in Psalm 136, 13 to 16, so it's a little bit further back. In Psalm 136, 13, it talks about the Exodus. The Exodus. Give thanks to him who parted the Red Sea. He led Israel safely through. Give thanks to him who led his people through the wilderness. His faithful love endures forever. The second most important theme is the Exodus. Why? Because the Exodus is the greatest symbol of our salvation. It's one of the most important foreshadowings of our salvation, where he's like, I will lead you out of slavery, out of sin, out of oppression, through the waters, like baptism, and into a new land where I will be your God. A new kingdom, a new way to live, because I'm going to be your God. If you have nothing to be thankful for, A, you're breathing today, and B, if you have given your life to Jesus, you are saved. That is literally the two most important things you have to worship God about. Something else we see a pattern here is that God always uses the past to bring us closer to him in the present and to encourage us in our future. He always uses your past, whether it's good or hard. He's saying, do you see the golden thread all throughout your life? Even before you knew me, even before I was literally conceived, God was moving the pieces into play so that I could be where I am today. To be speaking this very thing to you. And 20 plus, whatever how old you are years ago, God was moving the pieces into play so that you could be born in this generation as the person that you and I are, to do God's work, to be his people, to be his salt and light, for some reason, he has chosen you to be here today. And so, we give thanks to God for what he has done. He has given you breath to breathe. He has saved you. If nothing else, those are the two most important things we can worship him for. And so, this week, when we remember what God has done for us, it inspires us to worship him. That is your greatest takeaway today. When this week feels hard, because life is hard sometimes, remember and reflect on what God has done, on how he has led you where you are today. So, actually, I'm going to have you turn to your neighbor, find a friend. Let's pull up our pair shared questions. And I want you to find a friend, and I actually have you guys do it in session because I want you to chew on what you actually listen to, okay? It doesn't matter if Stacey yaps in the front, but you got nothing to take away with you, okay? So find a partner, find a friend, groups of 2 or 3 max, and I want you to share these questions together, okay? So what qualities of God do you gravitate towards the most? His goodness, kindness, mercy, whatever it may be. Why did you pick them, and how has God shown up in your life with those qualities? And last but not least, reflect on and remember all that God has done. How can you choose to worship him this week? Okay? So pair up in groups of 2 and 3 right now. Turn to your neighbor and start sharing, okay? I'll give you about 5 minutes, okay? Find your neighbor. Find your neighbor. Okay. All right, start sharing. All right, if we can have our praise team come up to the front and we can grab our lights, Ayang, please. As we share and as we reflect, for some of you, you process internally, others of you process externally. And so we are trying to find ways for you to engage in what you've learned, right? Because ultimately, we want to corporately together reflect on what God has done so that we can together grow closer in worship with God. Can we all stand, all of us in the room? Today and this week, as you go about your week, I pray that Psalm 136 will be a reminder to you that when we remember and reflect on what God has done, that is what inspires us to worship him. And so when we feel lack of inspiration to worship him, we are called to remember and reflect. Think about our life. Think about where we are right now and say, God, thank you. Maybe I have a hard thing going on right now, but God, the fact that I woke up today, that I have tomorrow that I might hope for, that is the greatest gift. God, your salvation is the greatest gift. There's not much else that matters when I really think about it. And so when we realize all that God has done, it inspires us to worship him. And so today, let's sing this song together as an act of worship together to declare his goodness, his kindness, his mercy, his love. It is never failing because that's who he is. Sing together.